I handed my son a bill for his expenses. He was speechless. My 16-year-old son recently asked me for a new gaming system. I told him no because he already has plenty of consoles and games. He really didn't need another one. I suggested that if he wanted it that badly, he could start saving up for it himself. That wasn't good enough for him. A couple of days later, he came back with a full-on budget, trying to show me how we could afford the new system if I just cut back on my own spending for 2 months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him straight up, absolutely not. That's not how this works. But he didn't stop there. He came back again, this time with even more calculations. He and his father had done the math on how much child support I'd received over the years, and they basically tried to tell me that buying the gaming system would barely make a dent in what I supposedly had. They acted like I was sitting on piles of extra cash just waiting to be spent. That's when I decided to teach him a lesson. I told him, if you really think that child support covers everything, I'll show you exactly what your monthly expenses look like. I went through everything: rent, food, school supplies, clothing, utilities, transportation, the whole 9 yards. I broke it down and handed him a bill for half of everything I pay for him in a month. When he saw the total, his face dropped. He couldn't believe how much it actually cost to take care of him. Child support? It didn't even cover 30% of his expenses. I could see the realization hit him that living isn't cheap, and I'm not just hoarding money for fun. Now, my ex is furious, accusing me of making our son feel like a burden. But honestly, I think it was a necessary wake-up call. I wasn't trying to make him feel bad, I was trying to make him understand the reality of finances. He's almost an adult, and it's about time he learned how things work in the real world. I still can't decide if I went too far, but part of me is glad I did it. Maybe now he'll appreciate what goes into keeping things running smoothly. And as for the gaming system? Well, I guess he'll have to save up for that one on his own. Sometimes, the best way to appreciate what you have is to understand exactly what it costs, and for one kid, that was a lesson he won't forget. I told my stepdaughter to ask her real dad for plane tickets, and it didn't go well. So, a bit of background first: I married my wife, Avery, 13 years ago. She has a 17-year-old daughter, Sophia, from her previous relationship, and we also have a 8-year-old son together. From the very start, Sophia and I haven't exactly gotten along. It's not for lack of trying, though. She just doesn't like me. When she was younger, she was scared I was going to break up their family. These days, it's more of a neutral dislike, but honestly, it's still tough. Avery is a stay-at-home mom, so I'm the one who provides financially for the family. That means I pay for pretty much everything for Sophia: her food, clothes, volleyball fees, field trips. I try to show an interest in her hobbies and even go to her games. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I do try my best to be a good stepdad. The problem is, she constantly gives me attitude. It's like, no matter what I do, she's always giving me one-word responses or trying to rile me up on purpose: staying out late, smelling like booze, sneaking boys in. You name it. But I still tell her I love her, hoping she'll grow out of this rebellious phase. Meanwhile, her real dad? She absolutely adores him. He doesn't even go to her games, he always makes excuses, and he forgot her birthday last month. She cried herself to sleep that night. Anyway, the other day, Sophia asked me if I could pay for her plane tickets so she could visit her boyfriend out of state. Normally, I'd step up and pay for it since Avery doesn't work, and her dad's useless. But this time, I was fed up with how she's treated me, so I told her, go ask your real dad. I could tell that hit her hard. Tears started to well up in her eyes, and she excused herself from the table. Later, my wife pulled me aside and said my comment was way out of line. I told her if anything, it was disrespectful for Sophia to treat me like a doormat, always asking for money but never showing me any respect. I told her I wasn't going to keep tolerating this kind of behavior in my own house. But my wife didn't get it. She said I shouldn't be making decisions like this on my own, and I was being the bad guy for saying that. She thought I was out of line for telling Sophia she couldn't get money from me anymore. Honestly, I was at my limit. I wasn't going to let Sophia walk all over me anymore. So, am I the bad guy here? Sometimes, setting boundaries can hurt, but when respect isn't mutual, it's hard to keep giving without getting anything back. Now, from family tensions to cultural expectations, our next story dives into a proposal gone terribly wrong and a woman who refused to be controlled. I humiliated a man and his family when he proposed to me. Was I wrong? I'm a 26-year-old woman, and I come from a very traditional Indian family. I moved to the United States for university, and when I did, I made sure to stay independent. I didn't want to rely on my family for financial help, so I got a part-time job and made sure to handle my fees with financial aid. Since then, I've kept in low contact with them, only visiting occasionally. About 2 years ago, my parents reached out to me because my younger brother was about to graduate from university, so I made the trip back home. Over the last couple of years, I've visited 4 times, and each time, the conversation has turned to marriage. They kept bringing it up, despite me clearly saying I wasn't interested. They mentioned that it's hard to find guys willing to marry older women, and I assured them I didn't need them to find a guy for me. I'm happy being child-free and don't want a traditional arranged marriage. In January, I went home again, and my parents told me they had something special planned for me. The next day, they said they were throwing me a welcome home party, and I thought, okay, they're trying to fix things between us. But I was wrong. At the party, they introduced me to a man in his 30s, along with his parents. Before I knew it, this guy was on one knee, holding out a beautiful ring, proposing to me. I was shocked and angry, not just at him but at my parents for still trying to control my life. I said no, but that didn't stop our parents from pushing me. I completely lost it. I called the guy, his parents, and my own parents every name I could think of. I told them they were lowlives for trying to trick me and insulted their views. I blasted them for being misogynistic, and after a lot of yelling, I packed my bags and left. I stayed in a hotel until it was time for my flight. My mom cried and begged me to stay, saying they'd already paid half the dowry and the ring. But I stopped answering their calls and texts because I was done with them. Now, some of my cousins and old friends are telling me that I was too rude to the guy and his family. The thing is, they were all in on it. They expected me to say yes and had been insulting me when I refused to change my mind. My parents were embarrassed by my rejection, and the guy and his family were humiliated, too. I'm wondering if I overreacted and should have handled the situation more calmly. But honestly, I felt cornered, and I'm so tired of them trying to dictate my life. So, was I wrong to be so harsh? When you're done being told how to live your life, sometimes the only answer is to stand up and walk away, even if it shocks everyone around you. Now, imagine your engagement is the happiest moment of your life, but the timing of the reveal? Well, let's just say it didn't go over quite as planned. I announced my engagement at my twin sister's wedding. Now my family won't speak to me. Growing up, my twin sister and I always had a weird kind of rivalry. I wouldn't say it was mutual, it mostly came from her side. Our dad left when we were 10, and since she wasn't close to me or my mom, it only deepened the distance between us. We've had our ups and downs, but things got really bad last week. My sister got married to her boyfriend of just 1 year. I'll be honest, I never really liked their relationship, and I thought they were rushing things. But I still showed up to the wedding, even though I wasn't thrilled about it. The kicker? My fiancé and I had just gotten engaged a week before. Out of respect for my sister, I agreed to keep it under wraps until after her big day. I thought it was a bit much, but I figured I'd go along with it. The wedding was going fine until the reception. It was huge, and I ran into people I hadn't seen since high school. Naturally, people were catching up, and when they saw my ring, they asked. I wasn't going to lie, so I told them we were engaged. I didn't shout it from the rooftops, I just answered questions when they came up. It was quick, just a congrats here and there, and I moved on. Apparently, that was enough to ruin the night for my sister. Near the end of the reception, she and my mom pulled me aside, fuming. They said I'd made her wedding all about me. I tried to explain that I wasn't going out of my way to tell people, they just asked. It wasn't like I got on stage and made an announcement. But they weren't having it. They said I was selfish and incapable of letting others have their moment. To make matters worse, most of our family and close friends have taken their side, saying I was out of line and inconsiderate. Now, my sister has cut me off, and my mom's not speaking to me either. I'm starting to wonder if maybe I did overstep, but I honestly didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't make a scene, I just answered questions when people asked. So, am I really the bad one for this? Or is my family just blowing things out of proportion? Sometimes, timing is everything, and when you take someone else's moment, you'd better be ready for the fallout. Now, we switch gears to a story where entitlement meets cold, hard reality. If you've ever dealt with a pushy neighbor, this next one's for you. I towed my neighbor's SUV after she hijacked my driveway. Am I the bad guy? I just closed on my first house a few months ago and was thrilled to move in. The previous owner was a sweet older gentleman who, because on-street parking is a nightmare here, let his neighbor, who he thought was disabled, park her big SUV in his driveway. I had no idea until moving day, when I rolled up and saw that same SUV blocking my spot just as the movers arrived. At first, I knocked on her door and politely asked her to move it so we could unload. She flew into a rage, claiming her friend had permission from the old owner, but I explained that he'd sold the place and it was now my driveway. She finally relented, but half an hour later I watched her trudging back, drenched in sweat. A couple of days later I came home from work to the exact same scene. I spent 20 minutes knocking and negotiating, only for her to tell me her ankles couldn't handle the walk from the street even though I, stubborn as I am, managed it myself. She moved the car again, but it was clear the cycle would never end. Then last week, she didn't even answer the door. Fed up, I had her SUV towed. She burst onto my porch screaming at me to get the hell off her property right before I reminded her it wasn't her property at all. To make sure nothing like that ever happened again, I installed a small locked fence a few days later. I've gotten dirty looks from her and a few neighbors, and even my mom told me I should have shown more compassion given her mobility struggles. I admit I felt a pang of guilt knowing it's tough for her to walk those extra minutes. But at the end of the day, it's my driveway and I couldn't keep letting her treat it like public parking. Am I really the bad guy for protecting my own space? Boundaries are boundaries, and when someone keeps crossing them, sometimes the only answer is a tow truck and a firm lesson. Next up, a classroom confession where discipline and humiliation cross paths. But was it effective, or just plain cruel? I let a dad publicly humiliate my student-teacher confessions. I teach a 5th grade class where managing behavior can feel like an epic gamble every day. One of my students, Calvin, is the classic class clown, except it isn't ever cute. A while back, he climbed onto the library tables and started dancing when he thought I wasn't looking. After trying various strategies and running out of ideas, I decided the usual talk to the parents approach might actually work. I privately contacted Calvin's dad, fully expecting the typical defensive response, but instead, he stormed in, dragged Calvin to me, and insisted his son apologize on the spot. He warned Calvin that if he ever got another bad report, he'd babysit him in class like, well, an actual baby. That got Calvin's attention briefly, but it felt empty because the dad barely even drops Calvin off at school himself. Sure enough, the misbehavior returned, now coupled with Calvin deliberately blurting out silly answers whenever I called on him. Exasperated, I pulled him aside and asked if he truly wanted his dad babysitting him all day at school, and he snarked back that his dad wouldn't do it because it would embarrass him. So I sent another email to his dad, politely requesting that he honor his own threat and sit in on class with Calvin for a day. Calvin had no idea this was coming. He kept whispering "Dad, please don't," as his dad took a seat right behind him. For the rest of the day, his dad micromanaged every move, snapped orders, and even shrugged off student questions. Calvin's classmates snickered, and Calvin himself ended up in tears more than once. By the next day, though, Calvin was like a different kid. His antics almost vanished overnight. Some colleagues have since asked why I didn't handle it more directly myself, but this is a private school where parents are VIPs and discipline has to navigate a minefield of entitlement. With many families of famous entertainers and steep tuition, bring in the parent is often the only leverage that really works. Reading the comments later, one ex-student shared that his own teacher used the same tactic and he still carries that public shame decades later. He warned that humiliating children may solve a behavior problem, but leaves a scar you can't see. Another commenter pointed out that if a parent is willing to shame his own child in public, it's a red flag about what happens at home. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if I crossed an ethical line by letting a dad degrade his son in my classroom. Sure, the misbehavior stopped, but at what cost to Calvin's self-esteem? I'm proud of the improved behavior, but ashamed that I outsourced discipline in a way that left a child feeling deeply embarrassed. Am I the bad here? There's a fine line between teaching a lesson and breaking someone's spirit and knowing where that line is. That's where things get tricky. Now, we're heading into a story about respect, accountability, and one dad who refused to let his son's joke slide. This one's all about owning your words. I made my son apologize to a Chinese delivery driver. Wait till you hear his reaction. I'm a 39-year-old guy, and about a week ago my wife and I ordered Chinese food for delivery one evening. When our driver knocked on the door, our 16-year-old daughter was busy carrying our cat upstairs. She didn't want Whiskers stealing any of our dinner. Right then, my 13-year-old son shouted out, "Hide the cat from that Chinese guy," loud enough for the delivery driver to hear. He clearly heard the remark and looked hurt, so I immediately said sorry on behalf of my family and took the food. After we closed the door, I sat my son down and told him flat out that jokes targeting someone's race aren't funny, they're wrong. He wouldn't admit he'd done anything bad, so that night I made him write a heartfelt apology to the driver whose name was on the receipt. I also had him crank out 2 one-page essays, one about Chinese culture and another explaining how racist stereotypes fuel real harm. The next day, I drove us back to the restaurant and made him read his apology aloud before handing over those essays. Our driver was visibly moved. He thanked us, thanked my son, and then shared stories of other times he'd faced insults while delivering food. That evening at home, my wife and I got into it. She thought forcing our son into an apology was too harsh and embarrassing. I shot back that it was far more humiliating for the driver to endure that kind of racism than for our boy to feel a little awkward. I won't tolerate hateful comments under my roof, and I was genuinely embarrassed that my own kid blurted out something so insensitive. My wife argued it was just a joke and insisted it wasn't a big deal. Sometimes I wonder if I went overboard. But I figured teaching him that words have consequences was worth a bit of teenage awkwardness. Scrolling through the online forum later, nearly everyone sided with me. One commenter, Della Evane, even pointed out that my wife could learn a thing or two from the lesson. Funny enough, it reminded me of when I copied math homework in middle school and my mom made me write apology letters to both my teacher and my buddy. Lesson stuck with me ever since. Sometimes, the best lessons are the hardest to learn, and when respect is earned the right way, it lasts a lifetime. Now for a story where the stakes are much higher. Imagine finding out your own parents have been using your name for years, and you're the one paying the price. I turned my parents in for identity theft. Did I go too far? I'm a 29-year-old guy, and ever since I was a kid, my parents have been drowning in debt, despite both of them pulling in more than 3 times what I make. Over the years, my aunt, uncles, and grandma have all lent them money to keep the lights and water on, and we even got evicted a couple of times. Whenever bills piled up, they'd conveniently have me call grandma for help, then turn around and blow the cash on handbags and jewelry. As soon as I hit adulthood, they started signing utilities and credit accounts in my name without asking me, because their credit was too trashed to qualify under their own names. When I discovered this, I begged them to stop, but they lied and I felt too overwhelmed to push back. Flash forward to this spring, I was counting on my income tax refund to cover my own expenses after the pandemic squeezed my paycheck. Instead, I got a court notice saying my whole refund had been seized and that part of my future paychecks would be garnished to settle an old debt. Naturally, I called my mom, and she feigned ignorance. When I rang the courthouse myself, I learned a creditor had sued me for unpaid bills, mailed all the summons and filings straight to my parents, and they never forwarded a thing. In effect, they'd stolen my identity, racked up charges in my name, and then let the case slide until the court took my money. My mom defended herself by claiming it was my duty as her kid to carry the family's burdens, but to me, it felt like a dagger in the back. My sister and mom both blasted me for being ungrateful, but my friends and my girlfriend urged me to involve the police, because if I didn't act, they'd just keep using my name to dodge their own debts. I'm terrified that reporting them could land my parents, ages 69 and 64, in jail, and that might shatter what little family bond we have left. Yet every time I think about letting them off the hook, I picture my own bank account drained and credit ruined. I've frozen my credit report, but that's only a band-aid. Deep down, I know I need to protect myself or risk this cycle repeating. So here I am, torn between loyalty to my family and the reality that they've been exploiting me for years. If I call the cops, I could send my parents to jail, but is that going too far? Am I in the right for standing up for myself, or the bad for possibly ruining their lives? It's hard enough to fight for your future, but when the people holding you back are your own family? That's a different kind of pain. And finally, we've got a story that's equal parts surreal and heartbreaking. When a so-called prank goes too far, the scars it leaves behind are far from funny. They dressed up to drive me to a breakdown? Hey, I've lived with schizophrenia for years now. It first showed up when I was 23 and, honestly, it's a lifelong thing. I'm involved in schizophrenia support groups and go to meetings, but I keep most of it private even from close friends. Because of my routines and the way I avoid certain triggers, a lot of people just chalk me up as quirky. My habits include skipping parties or backing out of plans at the last minute. I have to be extra careful about where I go or what I do if I sense a delusion brewing. Sure, I'll crack an odd joke once in a while, that's pretty standard for someone like me. But then a few of my so-called friends decided it'd be hilarious to stage a group prank, making me think I was losing my grip. They showed up at our meetup in ridiculous costumes, a wizard hat here, a dinosaur suit there, and dropped weird conspiracy lines as though it was totally normal. Stuff like, the police are tracking folks like you, or COVID was just a scheme to microchip us. Those are exactly the kinds of thoughts that haunt me when things start spiraling. I kept asking others if they were worried about the costumes or the crazy talk, but everyone just shrugged and played along. By the time I realized it wasn't real, I was on the verge of full-blown psychosis, so I checked myself into the hospital as a precaution. I was terrified my meds had stopped working altogether. Nobody heard from me during those few days in the ward, and once I got out, I told one friend what had gone down. They sent me a long apology, but I was so furious I lost it. I blocked everyone else's apologies, and I don't want to hear from them ever again. This wasn't a prank, it was straight up bullying. Standing up for yourself isn't always pretty, but sometimes it's the only choice you have. Whether it's dealing with family drama, demanding respect, or putting your foot down, today's story showed us that drawing the line isn't just brave, it's necessary. Let me know which story hit you hardest, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.